You're in the middle of focused work. Headphones on. You finally caught flow somewhere around your third coffee of the morning, and for the first time today, your brain isn't fragmenting in 12 directions at once. Then, in the corner of your screen, you see it. The little red dot blooming on the Slack icon in your dock. You glance. It's from your manager. 3 words. Got a sec? That's it. No context, no emoji, no follow-up. Just 3 words blinking at you from a tiny notification window. And in the next half second, your nervous system has already written 6 different stories about what's about to happen. Are you in trouble? Did you miss something? Is this about that project from last week? Is HR involved? You haven't even read the message a second time, and your heart rate is already up. Your flow state is gone. The work you were about to finish? Forget it. You're now mentally rehearsing what you might have done wrong, and you haven't even opened the chat. Welcome to one of the most underrated forms of corporate pressure in 2026, the strategic Slack message. The kind that looks completely innocent on the surface but is actually a precision tool, sometimes used unconsciously, sometimes used very consciously, to shift the dynamic between you and your boss in ways you won't notice until it's already done. Today I'm going to walk you through 5 specific types of Slack messages that should make you pause, breathe, and prepare before you reply. And pay close attention to the last one, because once you spot it, you'll never read your DMs the same way again. Let's start with the most common one, the one almost everyone has received and quietly panicked over. The first trap is the agendaless ping. Got a sec? Do you have a minute? Hey, that's it. No subject, no preview, no want to talk about the marketing deck, or just wanted to check in about Tuesday. Just a small, vague hook with no information attached. Most people assume that managers send these messages because they're busy, and they'll explain everything when they hop on the call. But there's actually a well-documented neurological reason this kind of message is so destabilizing. Psychologist Daniel Goleman, who popularized the concept of the amygdala hijack, has written extensively about how ambiguous threat signals trigger the brain's emotional alarm center long before the rational part of the mind can assess the actual risk. Think of it like an office version of a fire alarm with no information about where the fire is. By the time you join the call, your nervous system has already burned through 20 minutes of cortisol, your defenses are up, and you've prepared for the worst possible scenario. Which means your boss now has the conversational high ground before they've even said hello. Stop for a second and think about your own week. How many got a sec messages have you received from your manager? And how many of them turned out to be about something that genuinely required that level of mystery? If the answer is almost none, you're not paranoid. You're observing a pattern. That same pattern, weaponized just slightly differently, brings us to the second trap. The second trap is the quick question that's never actually quick. It starts with something like, hey, quick question. Do you know offhand what the timeline looks like on the X project? You answer. Then comes another quick question. Then another. Before you realize it, 45 minutes have evaporated, and you've somehow agreed to take ownership of 3 things that weren't on your plate this morning. This isn't an accident. Researchers in behavioral psychology, building on Robert Cialdini's foundational work on the principles of influence, have shown how the commitment and consistency principle quietly traps people inside expanding obligations. Once you say yes to the small, quick version of a request, the human brain feels enormous internal pressure to stay consistent and keep saying yes as the request grows. The word quick is doing a lot of psychological work here. It signals low cost, low risk, low effort. Which means by the time the request reveals its true scope, you've already mentally agreed to it. The Slack thread becomes a written record of every yes, every sure, every no problem, and now there's a permanent paper trail that says you volunteered. Here's something even more uncomfortable, because the third trap doesn't actually ask anything of you at all. The third trap is looping you in. This is the message where your boss forwards you a thread you were never part of, written by people you may barely know, about a problem that has almost nothing to do with your job description. The boss adds a single sentence at the bottom, something like, hey, looping you in on this, can you take it from here? Just like that, you now own a mess you didn't create, with stakeholders you didn't choose, on a timeline you didn't agree to. There's a concept in organizational psychology that helps explain why this hits so hard. Most people are familiar with diffusion of responsibility, the famous phenomenon where bystanders fail to act because everyone assumes someone else will. But looping you in is the inverse. Call it concentrated responsibility. Instead of spreading accountability across a group, your boss has just funneled all of it onto your shoulders in a single Slack forward. And because the original context was created without you, you are now responsible for outcomes shaped by decisions you had no input on. Workplace researchers studying digital communication have noted that asynchronous tools like Slack make this maneuver almost frictionless. It takes the manager 4 seconds. It takes you 4 weeks to dig out of it. If you're starting to feel a small knot in your stomach because you recognize this pattern, the fourth trap is going to feel even more familiar. The fourth trap is the casual command disguised as a polite request. It sounds like this. When you have a chance, mind handling the deck for the third quarter review? If you get a sec today, can you pull together the numbers? Whenever, but ideally before end of day, mind looking at this? Notice the structure. On the surface, it's polite. It's framed as a request, not an order. There's no formal deadline. There's no, this is your top priority. But every single one of those phrases is a soft launch of a command, with built-in deniability for the boss. Linguists who study indirect speech acts, building on the politeness theory developed by Penelope Brown and Stephen Levinson, have documented how powerful figures use polite framing to issue instructions that the receiver cannot easily refuse. Because if you push back, you look like you're rejecting a casual favor. And if you ask, "Is this urgent?" you look like you're being difficult about a small ask. The trap is the framing itself. By the time you understand it's a command, you've already implicitly accepted it. And now, the most important one. The one I promised you at the beginning. The one that, once you see it, will reframe every checking-in message you have ever received from a manager. The fifth trap is the manufactured concern message. It usually arrives at an odd hour, often after you've had a meeting that didn't quite go your way, or after a project where the outcome was mixed. It sounds like this. "Hey, just wanted to check in. Everything okay? I've noticed you've seemed a bit off lately. No pressure, just want to make sure you're good." On the surface, this looks like care. It feels like care. It might even be care. But here is the part nobody tells you. Once that message exists in writing, it has been documented. It is now a part of your file, even if your company doesn't have a formal HR file. The boss has just created a written record that says, "I, the manager, expressed concern about this employee's well-being." Which means, months later, if there's a performance conversation, or a layoff decision, or a restructuring, that message can be quietly referenced as evidence that we noticed something was off. The psychological work on what neuroscientist David Rock calls status threat in his SCARF model of social behavior is directly relevant here. Your brain reads "you seem off" as a soft attack on your standing. You become defensive. You over-explain. You reassure them at length that you are fine. And every one of those defensive responses also gets logged in the chat. Now there are two pieces of evidence: their concern and your defense. The trap, in this case, is the asymmetry. They wrote one careful sentence. You wrote 5 paragraphs trying to explain yourself. Guess whose version of the story is going to sound more measured later? So now that you can see all of these patterns clearly, how do you actually respond when one of these messages lands in your DMs? You don't ignore them. You don't fight them. You don't write a defensive wall of text. You respond with precision. Here are the 3 moves that completely change the dynamic. First, the pre-brief pivot. When you get a vague "got a sec" or a single "hey" with no context, do not immediately drop everything and panic. Reply with something like, "Absolutely. What's the topic so I can pull the right context before we hop on?" That's it. You haven't refused. You haven't been rude. But what you have just done is force them to share the agenda before the conversation starts. Which means you walk in informed, prepared, and emotionally regulated instead of walking in with your nervous system already on fire. This works because, as Goleman's research on the amygdala hijacks suggests, the threat response only takes full hold when information is missing. The moment you have context, the prefrontal cortex comes back online and you can think clearly. Second, the scope mirror. When you get a quick question or a casual request, reply by explicitly mirroring the scope back. Something like, "Happy to help. Just to make sure I'm on the same page," sounds like you need the timeline doc with the third quarter milestones, and you'd want that by Friday. Anything else in the picture I should know about? You have just done 3 things in one short message. You have timestamped the request, you have bounded its scope, and you have created a written record that defines exactly what you agreed to. The Cialdini consistency principle works in both directions. Once that boundary is in writing, it is much harder for the request to silently expand later. Third, the channel pivot. When a sensitive DM lands, especially the manufactured concern message or anything that feels emotionally loaded, do not write a long defensive response in the same Slack thread. Reply briefly with something like, "Thanks for reaching out. Want to grab 15 minutes tomorrow morning so we can talk properly?" By moving the conversation out of the written DM and into a real-time, in-person, or video setting, you accomplish two things at once. You stop feeding the asymmetric paper trail that works against you, and you reclaim control over the setting where the conversation actually happens. As researchers studying workplace incivility have repeatedly shown, the damage of these soft attacks is amplified when they live entirely in writing. Move them out of writing, and you quietly neutralize half their power. These three moves will protect you. They will shift the balance of power in your day-to-day in ways your boss will probably not consciously detect. But there is something deeper happening here that I need to tell you before you close this video. If anything I described today felt familiar, if you recognized your own week, your own boss, your own gut tightening at a notification sound, I want you to hear something very important. The exhaustion you feel at the end of a day of slack isn't laziness. It isn't a sign that you are not cut out for the job. It is the cumulative cost of constantly scanning every message for hidden meaning, every "got a sec" for hidden threat, every "looping you in" for hidden work. That kind of low-grade vigilance is not free. It steals from your focus, your creativity, your relationships at home, and the quality of the work you actually came here to do. You're not paranoid. You've just been operating inside a system that quietly taught your nervous system to read every notification like a possible alarm. The simple fact that you're here, trying to understand the mechanics of it, is already a sign that you are more aware than the system would like you to be. And awareness is the first move on the board. So tell me down in the comments, which of these messages have you received this week? Which one hit closest to home? I read every single comment, and honestly, some of the sharpest insights on this channel come straight from your stories. If you want to keep decoding what's really going on inside your office and your Slack workspace, stick around. I'll see you in the next one.